Now, Donald Trump has made a surprising move, threatening Russia with sanctions just days after reaching out to the country. This comes on the same day that he reached out to Iran to negotiate a nuclear deal. Now, Trump warned that if a deal to end the war in Ukraine isn't reached soon, he'll impose high levels of taxes, tariffs and sanctions on Russia, which could potentially cripple its banking sector. Now, Trump posted on his social media handle saying that based on the fact that Russia is absolutely pounding Ukraine on the battlefield, he's strongly considering large-scale banking sanctions. He said that sanctions and tariffs on Russia will take place until a ceasefire and final settlement agreement on peace is reached. In his latest address, President Trump also said that he's finding it harder to deal with Ukraine. Listen in.
I think we're doing very well with Russia. But right now they're bombing the hell out of Ukraine, I'm finding it more difficult, frankly, to deal with Ukraine. And they don't have the cards. They don't have the cards. As you know, we're meeting in Saudi Arabia on sometime next week, early. And we're talking, I find that in terms of getting a final settlement, it may be easier dealing with Russia, which is surprising because they have all the cards. We got to stop. They're losing on average 2,000 soldiers a week. No, I actually think he's doing what anybody else would do. I think he wants to get it stopped and settled, and I think he's hitting them harder than he's been hitting them. And I think probably anybody in that position would be doing that right now.
I'm being joined at this point from California, Spencer Crishley, senior journalist and author. Thank you, Mr. Crishley, for joining us. Now, it seems that Trump is having a sort of aggressive attitude towards bringing in peace. Now, it's quite the contrast to how Biden was dealing with the ceasefire agreement or the peace talks as well. It seems now he's pushing both leaders, sort of still leaning towards Russia and trusting Russia more than Ukraine, in his own words.
I think it's quite chilling to hear how the President of the United States not only says that he finds it easier to deal with the regime of a murderous dictator, but that he identifies with him. He says anybody would be doing what Putin is doing now. What Putin is doing now is deliberately targeting energy infrastructure, for example, to try to freeze Ukrainian civilians during the winter months. Trump only thinks that anybody would do that because apparently Trump identifies with psychopaths who have no concern for innocent life. So I think that it's important when we're dealing with this issue and other issues with Trump that we just take a breath now and then and remind ourselves about the way normal human beings think about morality, and remind ourselves in particular about what the United States of America is supposed to stand for. And it's not supposed to stand for forming alliances with a murderous dictator with a now decades-long record of committing war crimes.
Right, Mr. Crishley, what could be the repercussions of sanctions that Trump threatens to impose against Russia?
Well, who knows? I mean, apparently his tariff and sanctions threats are meaningless, as we've seen repeatedly in the short time he's been in office for the second time, with these on-again, off-again sanctions threatened against our closest allies, while he's talking about how easy he finds it to deal, again, with a murderous dictator, while he's at the same time going after our closest allies like Canada with very stiff sanctions indeed, and then repealing them the moment the stock market dips or he gets some angry phone calls from CEOs. With Trump, one of the difficulties in figuring out his behavior is trying to figure out how much of it is corruption and how much of it is just incompetence. He apparently was surprised when the stock market fell down after imposing these sanctions, despite basically every economist in the world warning him that's exactly what would happen.
Right, absolutely. And it seems that Russia also has not come out and sort of reacted to these threats, as well as the earlier statements that Trump has made. So it seems that Russia as well is finding it tough to understand the approach that US is now having, because earlier during the Biden administration, US was quite clear that they were backing Ukraine entirely.
Yes, I mean, President Biden rallied NATO's support behind Ukraine, and I think that it was one of the best accomplishments of his presidency. that he did that. There had been some disarray in Europe in terms of factionalism between the countries and some concerns about European countries devoting enough of their budgets to defense spending, for example. And one of the things that many people give President Biden credit for, including his critics, is that he was very successful at uniting NATO, uniting Europe in mutual defense and in defense of Ukraine against Russia. Now, of course, he also had the advantage that Europe has a very fresh memory of World War II and the Cold War. So they have been invaded both by the Nazis and by the Soviets when it comes to Central and Eastern Europe, and threatened by the Soviet Union since World War II, and threatened by Russia after the Soviet Union fell, after a brief period of hope when it looked like Russia might actually join the world's democracies, but instead went the route of kleptocracy and oligarchy under Putin.